Coming up on i24 News. Southern California bracing for new aftershocks after the region is rocked by its biggest earthquake in 20 years. Tehran threatening the UK after an Iranian oil tanker is seized by British Royal Marines. We'll tell you why it was taken and bring you the latest straight ahead. And the UN alleges Venezuela's president is sending death squads to murder thousands of his citizens. This as the country's economy collapses. We'll bring you to Venezuela for a special report on its devastating impact.
From the i24 News Studios in Times Square in New York, this is Take 30 with Derek Dennis.
Welcome to Take 30. I'm Michelle Devone in for Derek Dennis. Southern California is bracing for more aftershocks after its biggest earthquake in 2 decades. The initial quake registered 6.4 on the Richter scale, and some of the aftershocks were nearly as strong. Alyssa Julia Smith from our partner at Cheddar has more from LA.
2 powerful earthquakes hitting Southern California in under 24 hours over the July 4th holiday. The latest one coming early Friday morning at 4:07 Pacific time at a magnitude of 5.4. It's the largest of hundreds of aftershocks stemming from Thursday's earthquake, the region's largest in 2 decades. This was the moment when that 6.4 magnitude quake hit near the city of Ridgecrest, California, affecting people as far as Arizona and Mexico. About 15 million people felt it, according to the LA Times, with shaking lasting about 10 seconds, starting at 10:33 a.m. on Independence Day. It's the biggest earthquake with an epicenter in Southern California since a 7.1 tremor hit the Mojave Desert in 1999. A 7.2 quake hit Mexico on Easter Sunday in 2010, and that one was felt as far as LA. Despite the size, the damage was relatively limited Thursday, with no reports of deaths or serious injuries. But that didn't stop Ridgecrest Regional Hospital from evacuating patients. And there were plenty of reports of bottles falling off shelves at supermarkets, people running out of movie theaters, and some cuts and bruises in towns and cities across the area. And of course, when anything happens in LA, celebrities are quick to react, and July 4th was no exception. Everyone from Trevor Noah to Lil Nas X to Mariah Carey taking to Twitter to share their experiences. Director Ava DuVernay said she's been living in LA all her life, and Thursday's was the longest earthquake she's ever experienced. Now, even though the damage was low, not everything seemed to go according to plan. Some residents left wondering why a new app from the city of LA designed to give early warning signs about earthquakes did not go off on Thursday. The mayor's office unveiled Shake Alert LA earlier this year, saying it would give people as high as a 10-second warning before any shaking starts. So why didn't anyone get a notification on Thursday, like me? Well, according to city officials, the app is only activated if there are a reasonable chance of destruction in LA County, meaning that the 4th of July epicenter was too far away from the city to trigger a warning alert. But here in the area, people are still on high alert, with one expert telling the LA Times that there's about a 5% chance the region will see an even bigger earthquake hit within the next few days. And after years of quiet, now Southern California is more ready than ever. Back to you.
All right, thank you. And that was Alyssa Julia Smith reporting from our partners at Cheddar. Back in D.C., President Trump is urging government lawyers to find a way to add a citizenship question to the census. Now, critics say poor communities could get fewer resources as a result, and the GOP would benefit with a more favorable congressional map. The Supreme Court rejected the White House's reasoning last week, but Trump told reporters he has 4 or 5 options, including one that is a very familiar move.
We're thinking about doing that. It's one of the ways. We have 4 or 5 ways we can do it. It's one of the ways, and we're thinking about doing it very seriously. We're doing well in the census.
And for more about this, we're joined by our senior Washington correspondent, Dan Raviv. Dan, the White House is still looking to get this citizenship question onto the census after the Supreme Court rejected its initial reasoning. Now, the question is, what legal maneuvering do they have at this point?
Well, just to bring up the argument again, as if to say to a federal judge, oh, we didn't tell you the real reason. And so that's what Trump's Department of Justice is working on now. Last time around, it brought to the courts, including to the Supreme Court, several arguments as to why President Trump believes it's so important to ask every person living in this country, are you a citizen? And the Supreme Court, 5-4, just did not buy it. And so the Trump administration refuses now to give up. They're going to go to court again. The president said he might just issue an executive order, but that, of course, could be challenged in court. It looks like this is very important to the president, at least for the symbolic nature that he's fighting a fight. He likes to do that, Michelle.
Yes, I won't comment on that. On a less controversial subject, the White House is celebrating a strong jobs report. Great timing after just celebrating 4th of July. What exactly did that report show, and how is the White House looking now to capitalize on it politically?
Well, that's scheduled once a month. You know, on Friday, we find out how the U.S. economy did in terms of creating jobs last month. And most economists thought that it would be about 150,000, maybe 180,000 net jobs created. It was 225,000. And so the president put out a tweet that said, jobs, 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 jobs. He's also proud, by the way, that average hourly wages are going up. And so economists are saying, true, the economy is stronger. Still, you have a lot of people who aren't in the jobs that they want to be in. But I got to tell you, in the political world, this is trouble for Democrats. They will have trouble defeating a president at a time that the economy is perceived as strong. Michelle?
Indeed. And shifting to the campaign trail, which we have to touch upon, Joe Biden is making waves in now what is seen as a growing feud with Kamala Harris. What's the latest on that front?
Well, in a CNN interview, the former vice president, in fact, said he respects Kamala Harris, but he didn't expect that in the debate that she would bring up things that he says are not relevant. His views about busing. He said no one should question in any way that he cares about civil rights and about race. And so Biden's not the only one. We're hearing from other Democrats as well, and you know there's still more than 20 candidates for president, that they'd like instead, next time in late July, to talk about the Democrats versus Trump. Make all of them look good versus Donald Trump. But I think inevitably, with Biden still number one in the polls, and apparently now Kamala Harris number two, he especially will be attacked in various ways by the others. Michelle?
We'll keep looking. Dan Raviv, our senior correspondent in Washington, thanks so much. Now, overseas in Tehran, Tehran is threatening retaliation against the UK if it doesn't release an Iranian oil tanker in its custody. Now, what began as a mission to fight off a possible violation of EU sanctions could have far more serious consequences. i24NEWS defense correspondent Jonathan Regev explains.
On paper, it was an action against Syria, but it could trigger a war between the United Kingdom and Iran. It began when British Marines operating in Gibraltar, an overseas British territory, boarded a tanker named Grace 1.
We have reason to believe that the Grace 1 was carrying its shipment of crude oil to the Banyas refinery in Syria. That refinery is the property of an entity that is subject to European Union sanctions against Syria.
These sanctions were imposed at the beginning of the Syrian civil war in 2011, but the EU has never seized a tanker at sea before. So why now? Maybe the answer is not the destination of this tanker, but its origin. Experts say Grace 1, operating under a Panamanian flag, set sail from southern Iran nearly 3 months ago, loaded up with Iranian oil, and this latest operation comes amid very high tensions between Washington and Tehran.
We are studying the circumstances in which it happened. It was a demand by the United States to the United Kingdom.
There has been no official confirmation from the U.S. that there was such a demand, but National Security Advisor John Bolton described the seizure of Grace 1 as excellent news. Opinions in Iran are naturally different. A senior commander in Iran's elite Revolutionary Guards took to Twitter on Friday to warn that Iran would seize a British tanker if the Iranian tanker was not immediately released. With the latest incidents involving tankers in the Persian Gulf widely blamed on Iran, these threats should be taken seriously. Jonathan Regev, i24NEWS.
Still to come, we'll introduce you to a man whose cross-country journey is advancing an important cause one step at a time. Plus,
up next, we're taking a tour of JFK International Airport's hottest new hotel with features you'll never forget.
And now a take around the world in 30 seconds. Here we go. In Jerusalem, protesters rallied against the deportation of 50 Israeli-born Filipino children whose parents overstayed their visas. The move would reverse a 2010 decision not to deport school-aged children over humanitarian concerns. British police arrested 8 suspects in the largest modern-day slavery network ever exposed in the UK. They say more than 400 victims were promised a better life, but were forced into rat-infested homes with demeaning jobs. But there's also good news from England. U.S. tennis prodigy Coco Gauff is on to Wimbledon's 4th round after a comeback win. At 15, she's the youngest woman to reach the round of 16 since 1991. And that's the world in 30 seconds. Welcome back. The UN's human rights chief presented a shocking report Friday detailing Venezuela's death squads involved in thousands of extrajudicial killings. The report alleges the country's security forces are sending the squads to kill young men and then stage the murder scenes to look like the victims resisted arrest. The government shows nearly 5,300 deaths last year were blamed on criminals resisting arrests, with nearly 1,600 more by mid-May of this year. The report drew on more than 550 victim accounts and says it was part of a plan by President Nicolas Maduro to silence his political opponents. Venezuela has suffered an economic freefall in recent years, leading to devastating poverty throughout the country. i24NEWS' Bianca Zanini recently traveled to the country's border with Brazil and came back with an eye-opening 4-part series. She filed this report.
Hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans are fleeing their country every day. Political chaos, instability, hunger, and the collapse of the country's health system have caused one of the world's largest humanitarian crises, not caused by war. Just across the border from a shattered Venezuela in Brazil is a small town, overwhelmed by the hundreds of desperate Venezuelans flooding in every day. That's Venezuela's national anthem, Glory to the Brave People. But Venezuela's people are suffering, and they're leaving in droves. More than 4 million people have fled in the past 4 years. About 240,000 have made their way to Brazil. Because in their home country, at one point the richest in Latin America, there are no jobs, not enough medicine, and not even enough food. So they leave and they come to Brazil in search of a better life.
There are various groups of people who come here. Some use the country just as transit to Argentina, Uruguay, Chile. Others already have family members here who are working and have a place to stay. Others again who come here with nothing. They come searching for work.
Last year, Brazil launched an emergency operation, Acolhida, or shelter, involving the UNHCR, that's the UN Refugee Agency, local authorities, and the Brazilian military. Now, once they cross the border, they're sent here, to my left. They're registered, documented, and vaccinated. Those wishing to stay are told how to seek asylum or temporary residency, and the worst cases are sent to temporary emergency shelters, like this one, to my right. Military police check those coming in by car and by foot. But unlike the Venezuelan borders with Colombia and Peru, there's no need to show passports or even documents when entering Brazil.
Because they're entering as refugees. And what is refuge? It's a protection for the people who are escaping a situation of risk in Venezuela, and they come here to Brazil, even without documents. So when someone arrives and says they don't have any documents, they will still be able to enter as refugees.
The temporary shelter is completely full, all the time. Some come for 5 days, others end up staying for months.
Yes, in Pacaraima, in the hospital.
This is baby Jose. He's 7 days old. His mom crossed the border a month ago, 8.5 months pregnant.
Yes, but we were able to come by car, by the path.
She means they crossed the border illegally, because until about a month ago, Venezuela's Maduro had closed the border in an effort to prevent the opposition from bringing in humanitarian aid. Maduro denying any crisis, calling the relief a U.S. orchestrated show. But after continuous protests and pressure, he reopened the crossing in mid-May.
We've been allowed to stay here a month and 15 days. My 5 children, my husband, my sister, and me.
Like this family, the majority of Venezuelans arriving in Brazil are families with children. They've paid an especially high price from the country's collapse. Just last month, the death of a 4th child in Venezuela's main pediatric hospital has caused an international outcry, with the opposition blaming Maduro for massive blackouts, shortage of basic medical equipment, and of course, lack of food and medicine. For Frances, there's no going back to Venezuela. It's not safe. And her family's story is far from unique.
We're here almost 24 hours a day, working with no breaks. And what gets to me is that no matter how much we work, there will be another family and another family in need of our help. Always. It doesn't stop.
The kids here in the shelter are lucky. They're safe from hunger and from living in the streets. But this is a temporary shelter, and time is running out. Bianca Zanini, i24 News, on the border between Brazil and Venezuela.
Thank you, Bianca. All right, moving back to the U.S., the week of July 4th is filled with celebrations of America, but veterans are often lost in those festivities. Our next guest is hoping to raise awareness for those who fought for the U.S. and are now in need with a cross-country journey. Navy veteran Tom Zurhelen is 3 months into his Vet Zero walk across America and joins us after another day on the road via Skype from Kingsley, Iowa. Tom, thanks for being here. You've been on the road since April 15th, and you'll start the final leg of your walk soon. Why did you call it a Vet Zero walk, and what message are you looking to send?
Thanks, Michelle. We call it Vet Zero because it's all about the numbers. Every day in America, 22 veterans take their own lives. And every night in America, 40,387 is the average number of homeless veterans on the streets every night. So we want to take those numbers to zero, and that's how Vet Zero was born.
Now, you mentioned these very startling numbers, and often those who suffer from PTSD don't seek out help. What do you think we can do as a society to change that?
I think it all starts with veterans helping veterans. You know, veterans, they're a peculiar bunch. They don't want to talk to just anybody, and they want to talk to people that have similar experiences. So getting the veterans you love in touch with other veterans to get them the help they need, I think that's the first step.
And maybe you can tell us about your personal journey. What prompted you on a personal level to go out and walk the country? Also, every step of the way has a meaning, from the number of miles to the number and amount you want to raise. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm crazy. Don't try this at home. But so we're trying to walk 22 miles a day to recognize that number of 22 veteran suicides every day. We started in Portland, Oregon on April 14th. And now, as you said, I'm in right smack dab in the middle of Iowa. Hopefully be home back to Poughkeepsie, New York on August 23rd. I'm the commander of the Veterans of Foreign Wars, or VFW, back home in Poughkeepsie. And that's really where I got the idea. Pretty much every day I get a phone call from a nonprofit or a veteran seeking help, either for mental health issues or homelessness, financial issues. And it got to a point where we couldn't help everybody. So I wanted to raise awareness, get everybody involved, because if I figured if this is happening in my hometown of Poughkeepsie, New York, it's probably happening everywhere across America.
Sure. And I noticed on the GoFundMe page, you're halfway to your fundraising goal. Maybe you can tell us about some of the highlights of your journey and some of the challenges.
Well, the low point was definitely Wyoming, when 7,000 feet, I'm by myself, and there's no towns. Camping out every night, snowstorms. So now Iowa seems a lot nicer and sunnier and flatter. But the high points have all been the veterans I've talked to pretty much every day, in the gas station, at a restaurant, just talking to them, sharing their stories, and they've been pretty powerful. And I'm really honored that so many veterans have been sharing their stories with me along the way the last 3 months, and I've got 2 months to go.
Amazing. So maybe just a final word. What are you hoping to achieve in these next 2 months?
Well, definitely eating home-cooked meals. I think that's what I miss most. But just getting home and getting back to my life. I'm a professor out of college, and I'm looking forward to, hopefully just keep spreading the word about Net Zero.
Sure. Tom Zurell, thank you so much for joining us, and best of luck. All right, Trans World Airlines, better known as TWA, defined stylish air travel for decades. More than an airline, it was a cultural touchstone. However, the company went bankrupt before American Airlines bought it in 2001. And that left TWA's breathtaking flight center at JFK Airport abandoned. But that old transit hub has been revamped into a luxury hotel straight out of another era. I24 News correspondent Ariel Hickson went back to the future for a visit.
Fly back in time to a luxury hotel at the unlikeliest of locations, and the one time you want to be stuck on an airport runway.
It's like a blast from the past now. A modern blast from the past.
TWA Flight Center, the terminal that was once the epitome of the 60s jet age, shut down in 2001. But after a major overhaul, the transit hub of the past has returned to its former glory and making quite the comeback, but of a very different kind.
When this building was built in 1962, when it first opened, JFK was not called JFK, it was called Idlewild Airport. It was designed as a terminal city, and so every airline had its own signature building.
The $260 million project took 5 years to complete to get the terminal back in shape. And as you can see, no detail was spared, from working rotary phones to the ticking departure boards and even the stewardess from a different era. You can't help but notice the little touches they have to bring you back in time, like these vintage outfits that some of the employees actually used to wear back in the day. Gail and Stephen Colmo started their relationship back when this terminal was hustling and bustling, shuttling passengers to points across the globe.
It was actually our first date going away 32 years ago.
Yes.
We actually came through this terminal.
It's a beautiful space with very modern features, but clearly there's a vintage feel here. Why was that the case?
1962 in particular was such a critical moment in our country's history. John F. Kennedy was president, so it was sort of the height of Camelot. You had the Beatles arriving, the British invasion, right here at this building. The Jetsons appeared as the first color television show as well, so it was this era of hope.
But if visiting the 60s may not be your thing, there are a few luxury features that bring you back to 2019. Imagine taking a dip between flights at this infinity rooftop pool with panoramic views of JFK. And get this, it's even open in the winter. Other perks include soundproof rooms, so you can watch planes take off right from your window. And speaking of runways, here's one way to unwind. Climb aboard TWA's restored 1958 Connie, short for Constellation, airplane, now a cocktail lounge. It's the hotel of the future, inspired by a timeless past that still enchants visitors today.
I think our goal is to make the airport a destination.
Ariel Hickson, I24 News.
And that wraps up Take 30. Don't go anywhere because Stateside is coming up next. Thank you for watching.